Okay, let's talk about this. I'm at the airport waiting for my flight. I read this while I was eating. Pardon the background noise. It's an airport. So this is, remember what's going on, and it's the second part of the case, right? The Jen Abel versus Jones Works, the indemnity thing, that you should have to pay for whatever liability I have because I was working for you at the time that all of this happened. So remember that Jennifer Abel filed a motion for summary judgment in that case saying you should just go ahead and rule that I'm going to get indemnified, which is going to put Jones out on the ledge. Jones has filed a motion for spoliation sanctions, which are very similar to the one Lively filed against Wayfair, saying there's all these signal messages that would help me prove that you were actually going rogue and were not working for me at the time, but they were all on Signal, and so I do not have them. So this is specific to Jen Abel and those claims by Jones, although it does give us, I think, a preview of some of the things that the other people are going to argue. First and foremost, everybody needs to give a shout out to Ashley Sovin. Ashley is the court reporter on every single one of these depo transcripts. Ashley knows more about this case than any of us ever will. She has been in every single deposition on the Wayfair side so far that I have seen, and even some of the third parties. So she is clearly the preferred court reporter for somebody or everybody, and she has been working her ass off. So everybody, thank you, Ashley. She knows everything. The first thing that jumped off the page at me, and I like to think I can't be surprised anymore, but here we are, is that Jones is claiming in her motion that the same thing that Lively's claiming about Wayfair, that just the use of Signal is enough to show spoliation because the purpose of that app is that things auto-delete. So Abel submits deposition testimony. Now, this is Abel's deposition testimony, so maybe Jones has deposition testimony that says something different. But Abel testified, yeah, I used Signal before because Stephanie told me to. Because when I was working at Jones Works, I had a client, and this person is so famous they have been blacked out, that wanted to use Signal. And it says, look, Stephanie asked that I download Signal. And then here I think this is actually the page before it, but she says, initially Stephanie Jones asked me to download Signal. She used it frequently. You don't say. And we were working together with a client who primarily used Signal. And then after that client terminated us, I deactivated it, and then I reactivated it again. Now, this does not get her out of the whole issue, because the issue is what happened in 2024. But just the audacity of Stephanie Jones to say, like, I can't believe that you use this app that allows messages to delete. It's like, you mean the one that you use, that you told me to use? And then they've just also included this message back in November of 2023 of Stephanie Jones talking about don't use Zoom because there's info security problems there, which there were, and they're common, there often are. But it's here Stephanie recognizing, like, you have to be careful which system you use. And at least part of, if I understand correctly, we'll see what the response is, part of Wayfair's justification for using Signal is they're worried about people being able to get to their messages. So, Stephanie, I don't think right now, other than some political figures, I don't think there's anyone right now that I disrespect more than Stephanie Jones. I just have no respect for this woman. She's just... All right, then we've got testimony from Heath talking about this January 4th meeting where he says that Ryan Reynolds was yelling at everybody. And, this has been a big talking point for a while, and I'd be interested to hear what Blake Lively said about it in her deposition. But Heath goes on here for a while about how he felt like he was belittling them and Justin was frozen, and, I guess it sounds like Ryan was just kind of saying, like, why won't you apologize? Why won't you apologize? That's what you do. And he's like, but I didn't do it. What's interesting about this to me is that I have lost count of the number of times I have told human resources representatives and EEO investigators, you do not have to take abuse from a complainant. So assuming that this could potentially be like protected activity or complaining about sexual harassment, you still don't get to yell at people. First of all, it's not him, it's her complaint. But you don't get to do that. you don't get to scream and yell and call people names. And I have had many, many cases. In fact, I had one not that long ago where someone said this person is just calling me names and blah, blah, blah. And I had someone a client call me and go, is it okay that I hung up on this woman? And I said, what did she say to you? And she said, she started calling me a bitch. I said, yeah, hang up on her. So to the extent that this is going to be claimed as any kind of protected activity, I don't get it. This is a response that has lots of adjectives and lots of metaphors, like they're a house of cards and the purloined messages, and it's very, it has a point of view. It's not dry and clean. Like it's clearly intended to show this motion in their mind is just absolutely ridiculous. But one of the most interesting parts for me was this footnote, because we haven't seen this yet. And I suspect this is going to show up in all the responses. And this footnote says that in the Second Circuit where we are, the law is not clear yet on what the standard of proof is for spoliation sanctions. So in civil law, the vast majority of the time, the standard of proof is preponderance of the evidence, 50.1%, right? But sometimes there are issues where the standard is clear and convincing, which is higher. And so the point they're making here is, we think even by preponderance of the evidence, she doesn't have a chance of winning this. But this may be clear and convincing, which raises the standard even more. So I'm interested in her reply on this. So, she essentially makes the arguments. It's twofold, right? It's, did you have the obligation to preserve them at all? And if you did, did you delete them with intent, right? So she says, the factual argument she makes is, in August of 2024, the only thing I could have been aware of is that potentially Lively was going to claim sexual harassment. How could I have been aware that she might potentially sue for a smear campaign that even according to you, we hadn't started doing yet? How could I be on notice of that? Which to me seems like a pretty logically fair point. In terms of the deletion, this is where the interesting law is coming in. I'm fascinated to see how this turns out. It's this thing that we've all been saying, which is like, you can't delete something that never existed in the first place. What do you do with these ephemeral message systems? And, sometimes in these cases, there's a gap, right? They'll say like, there's text messages that go from here to here, and then they stop for 3 months, and then they pick up again. And it's like, okay, well, what happened during that gap? Or sometimes somebody will send a message and say, let's take this conversation offline. Let's get this to Signal, right? But they don't have any of that. And so she's like, you don't have the evidence that we purposely stopped speaking in one type of medium and moved to another. She leans very heavily on the fact that Jones cites several cases and says those cases are old, and that standard in those cases is old, and the new standard is that you have to have intent to deprive the other party of the information. It can't just be negligence, it can't just be disregard, it can't just be lazy. You have to have the specific intent to deprive. So I'm interested in Jones's response to that. But then they go pretty deeply into this case, which is another case. It's in the Eastern District of New York, which is sort of a sister district to Southern. They have the same local rules, called this Cooper Foods. Now, this case has limited applicability because, number one, the decision is by a magistrate and not a judge, and number two, the decision is not published. But it does speak almost precisely to these issues, and depending on whether Lyman respects the magistrate who wrote it or respects the reasoning, could be helpful. So I looked it up. Okay, the airport lady was coming. So what's happening in this case, in the Cooper Foods case, is they're talking about WhatsApp. And it looks like one of the parties basically made the same argument there, that like just the fact that you're using WhatsApp because things disappear is a problem. And the court's like, look, that's not enough. We don't even know if there were any. And if there were, we don't even know what they were about. Look at this bottom line. The court cannot conclude that evidence existed during the time the disappearing messages feature was enabled simply because there were messages during other periods. Like nothing. And then this court talks about how, like, they could have maybe found this information out from other places. They tried to ask people in depositions, were there messages? They said, I don't remember any, which is exactly what Abel and company said here. And then most interestingly, in this case, the guy who is being accused of deleting messages said straight out, oh yeah, I put the disappearing messages feature on because I didn't want anybody looking at my messages with my friends. So he intended for them to be deleted, but the court said that's not enough for spoliation because his intent wasn't to deprive this other litigant of evidence. It was to keep stuff private, and that's not the same. So I have a feeling we're going to see that case a few more times.